Hello, this is Wine Blast, and I'm going to get very personal very quickly. Susie, you're my wife, as well as a fellow master of wine. Am I allowed to recite you some poetry? You know, it speaks of love.
Oh, well, of course.
Among other things.
Yeah?
Go
for it.
All
Go
right,
for
great.
it.
Here we go. Okay. Superlative wine, radiant and bright, rivaling the very sun's scintillation. While we may not know heaven in this life, still we have paradise's libation. So, critic, pour me one, and sing for me, for wine and I are siblings till my expiration. Should I die, bury me next to a vineyard, whose roots supply my bones irrigation.
Well, that is nice.
Do you like it?
I like it. But I have to say, let's face it, it's more about love for the wine than love for me, which is a bit disappointing.
I didn't specify where the love was directed.
I can see that. But I like it.
It's good,
funny.
It's good.
It's definitely funny.
It's really lovely, isn't it? So this is the poetry of the famous Arab wine poet Abu Nuwas, translated by the brilliant Alex Rowell in his book Vintage Humour, the Islamic wine poetry of Abu Nuwas. And it leads us into our topic today, which is a sort of glimpse into a lesser-known side of wine. What might sort of loosely be termed wine from the Arab world.
Yep, so this came up when the new listener got in touch, Aghiles or Aghi Ourad, and he got in touch to say he'd started up a new wine venture in the UK called the Other Grape, selling wines from the Arab world, which is his phrase, not ours.
Yeah.
Now, Aggie's aim is to try to break down stereotypes and promote these countries' proud winemaking history and their unique wines and indigenous grapes. And the first wines he's featuring in this new venture are from Algeria and Lebanon.
Yeah. And it really piqued our curiosity, didn't it? Particularly since I'm just back from filming in Lebanon for my new wine and travel show, The Wild Side of Wine. So
Get your plug in there.
Well, it's the first of many, so brace yourselves, people. Bear with me.
What's it called?
So anyway, we wanted to put the two things together, really, didn't we? And take this chance to look at this side of wine, which is perhaps, I don't know, a bit misunderstood. But it's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, so many questions spring to mind immediately. Like, how does producing wine in a Muslim majority country work? And come to that, what really is the relationship between Islam and alcohol? I mean, the common misunderstanding is that it's banned in the Quran, the common understanding, not misunderstanding, it's banned in the Quran. But from what we understand, that's not necessarily the reality of Muslim life.
No. And I know that actually this causes a memory to rise. From when we talked to Hugh Johnson, wasn't it, back in season one?
Season one,
when
yeah.
he talked about that in terms of the history of wine.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah. Anyway, beyond all this, what are the wines actually like? Should we, as wine lovers, be searching them out?
Yeah. And I suppose just to prove that this isn't some deliberately obscure niche we're diving into, as we are
one of our properly obscure niches,
as we can do from time to time. Just to prove how relevant the history, the story of wine in these countries is. Did you know that in the 1950s, Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia accounted for 2/3 of the entire international wine trade?
That is mind-boggling, isn't it? Unbelievable. And by that you mean exports, don't you?
Yeah. I guess so. So total overall global wine exports or wine shipped between countries. Those three North African nations made up 2/3 of total shipments.
Unbelievable.
But it's just quite eye-opening, isn't it?
It is. I mean, but let's face it, things have changed quite a bit since then.
Yeah,
obviously.
But it's only sort of 70 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So at that era, lots of wine was drunk domestically in places like France, Italy, and Spain. So it wasn't being exported from the big producers. And this was before the New World really got going. Algeria and Tunisia and parts of Morocco at that time were still under French control. So most of the wine was being actually sent to France, almost like a domestic production. But anyway, that's what we're going to get into, all of this. And more importantly, we're going to get into what's happening now in these places. Yeah.
So shall we start briefly with Lebanon, and then we can come on to Aghi and what he's doing?
Yeah, good idea.
So just remind us, what was your trip to Lebanon like?
It was amazing. I mean, properly mind-blowing. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in a wine context before. And that's saying something because we've been around the block, haven't we?
We have.
In wine terms. We've touched on religion a bit already, but for me, this almost felt like a wine pilgrimage.
In what way?
I don't know. On the one hand, there's just so much history there, and history you didn't necessarily know, you weren't aware of in the wine context. So modern-day Lebanon could have been one of the first places that humans migrating out of Africa along the Rift Valley first encountered the wild grapevine, climbing up the giant cedar trees that are Lebanon's national symbol. It's a hypothesis. But then you have the Phoenicians, the Lebanese of antiquity, who were traders par excellence, and they sailed out of port cities along the coast, like Beirut, what is Beirut, Sidon, Tyre, and Byblos today. And they took wine and the vine to places we now think of as the heartland of wine, like France, Spain, Italy, Cyprus, also sort of North Africa. So the Lebanese, if you like, gave the gift of wine to the world. And
the Temple of Bacchus in Baalbek in the Bekaa Valley is famous as a historical landmark in Lebanon, isn't it?
Yeah, you're quite right to pick up on that, because that is, I remember talking to you about this when I got back, but that was what really crystallised this feeling of pilgrimage for me, going to this place. I'd seen the pictures, I'd heard the stories, but nothing came anywhere close to the feeling of walking into the Temple of Bacchus in Baalbek. You're in this high altitude plateau, which is the Bekaa Valley. You've got Syria just over the mountains on one side. You got snow on the mountain peaks in the distance. This was in May, so it was warm. It's prime Hezbollah territory, yellow flags fluttering everywhere. And then you come across this monumental, stunning, epic Roman temple celebrating Bacchanalia and wine and partying and mad times. It just sort of pops up out of nowhere, and it totally bowls you over. It just feels like a holy site for wine that every wine lover should go or at least go to at least once in their life.
I
certainly recommend it.
We'd all love to. But let's face it, Lebanon isn't the easiest place to get to and travel around, is it? If you did want to go.
That's true, sadly. It is doable, and I'd encourage people to go, because sometimes you're scared of these things. But Lebanon, needs visitors, and it is doable. It can feel a bit scary at times. There tend to be lots of military types with scarily big guns at regular checkpoints.
I do remember you ringing and telling me that and thinking, not sure I'm happier there, frankly.
Yeah, but it was election time when we went, so I think there was an increased army presence while we were there. Plus, I think we were nervous because we had big cameras and a drone, which is very much a no-no there and could have got us into serious trouble. So maybe we were.
Why? In what way can it get you into trouble?
Well, I think they assume that drones mean you're a spy. And there's not much discussion about that if you get caught with one. So actually, I did mention this in our Armenian episode, but we did have to hire a local drone operator, which generally our director never does that. But this drone operator was part of the Armenian community in Lebanon, and he seemed to have friends in the army.
Always good.
So he tended to smooth things over for us, even though it was always a little bit worrying when he kind of disappeared off for a while to sort of. When you asked him where he'd been, so I was just seeing my friends in the army. You think I'm not going to ask? I don't know what's going on.
I suppose it probably doesn't it just add to the drama of the place, the feeling of adventure.
Do you know what? You're absolutely right. It does. Totally.
Living on the edge.
I think life is many things in Lebanon, but boring just isn't one of them. No. There's a lot of drama there.
But I suppose that image of violence, of conflict, is one that Lebanon struggles to shed, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think for many people, Lebanon is associated with conflict, whether it was a civil war, 1975 to 1990, or the outbreaks of violence since, that's the image, isn't it? But equally, that's not the whole picture. It never is. It's not the true picture of the place. You go to places like Byblos or Batroun, or you could be anywhere in the Mediterranean, frankly. These beautiful fishing villages with beaches and boats and beer, and it's really chilled and beautiful.
So explain, where does the conflict come from?
Yeah, so I think it is important to touch on this. I think it's a really good question. Part of it is that Lebanon is just a melting pot of religions and communities. So many people in one place. Partly because it's such a nice place. You look at the lists of people who've conquered or invaded or just been there over the years, and it's as long as your arm. Egyptians, Assyrians, Greeks, Romans, Crusaders, Ottomans, French. It goes on. So Lebanon used to be a majority Christian country. But I think now it's majority Muslim, or it's accepted to be stuff, even though I haven't done a sort of proper census for a while. And I think one of the key dynamics lately, and it's really important to understand Lebanon in this context, but it's been the external forces. So, for example, Palestinian refugees coming in after the creation of Israel, and its aftermath. And also, Syrian refugees. There's, I think, over 1 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon right now who have been fleeing the war there. So you've got the influence of Iran, Syria, Israel, in this sort of really quite complicated place with so many communities. It's just a sort of tinderbox.
And you saw the effect of that conflict on wine when you were there, didn't you?
Yeah, that's the really important thing. With this series, what we're trying to do is look at a culture, a place and its people through the bottom of a wine glass.
Of wine, yeah.
Exactly. So try to make sense of it all. So for example, I visited Jill and Naji Boutros at Chateau Bellevue in a place called Hamdoun. I had to work on my pronunciation of that. Still
Chateau Bellevue sounds like you're in the middle of Bordeaux or something, doesn't it?
It does a bit. Well, the French influence, the French controlled Lebanon for a long time. So there's a lot of sort of francophone stuff and French culture and history there.
Yeah.
But I mean, when you say Bellevue, beautiful view, Hamdoun is high up in these mountains and you have the most beautiful views. And these are such special places. Anyway, but they Jill and Naji there are using wine as a way to rebuild their community, which is a historic winemaking area. But it became the front line, one of the front lines during the Civil War. There was just massive destruction there, and there was a massacre of the villagers as well, very, very sadly. Naji showed me the vineyard where for example, his mother's cousin had been blown up by a cluster bomb when he was tending the vines there, which is very, very sad.
That must have been pretty intense to visit and be there with them.
It really was.
To hear.
It felt I felt very privileged to be there, that they were sharing something so personal. But so much in Lebanon is just intense. I think that's one word I would use to sum the country up. It is intense. And then Naji, he also showed me the site where his grandfather's hotel once stood, which was the Hotel Bellevue. And very sadly, it had been used as target practice by tanks and artillery in the war. And now all that remained were fragments of tiles and amphorae sort of scattered around in the vines, because he's planted a vineyard there to sort of revive it. And, he was in tears telling me about all this, understandably so.
I mean, Lebanon's had such tough times, hasn't it? And we've touched on this before when we did an episode after that huge explosion in Beirut, but also talking about the very serious economic issues.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really serious. I had one wine producer say to me that the situation now is far worse than during the Civil War for most people. I think the Civil War affected, localised people really, really badly, but elsewhere, life could carry on. But because of the economic collapse in the country now, people's money has just completely devalued. Banks are basically banning people from accessing their savings. Can you imagine that? The bank telling you, right, your money now is worth much less than what it was, and you can only access a small fraction of it.
Yeah.
So it's paralysing the country.
But is this where wine can actually help?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we did touch on this, I think, in the episode you mentioned as well. Selling stuff abroad means they can earn precious hard currency. They call it sort of fresh dollars. There's not much in Lebanon that can do that, actually. A lot of it is service industry, so there's not a huge export industry. But wine is one thing that can. And it also presents this wonderful perspective on the culture as this ancient winemaking culture. So, we wine lovers can help. And the wines themselves are so exciting at the moment.
Okay, so tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. So briefly, I think the thing to understand about Lebanon, we've touched on it already, is that so much of it is mountainous, at high altitude. So yes, you've got this baking sort of Middle Eastern sun, Levantine sun, but you also get the freshness of altitude. So these two things together are quite magical. So the wines tend to have lots of character, tend to be quite extrovert in style, but that freshness of altitude means they're very balanced and kind of foodie and cultured. And so I think, right now we're seeing a renaissance of Lebanese wines, people fighting against the odds to have made these things happen. I think the foundations for the modern era were laid when the French controlled Lebanon, as we've sort of mentioned. And that was between the two world wars. Yeah. They brought in Grenache and Cinsault, but they'd been around before. The French Jesuits had been around before in the late 19th century and sort of brought this stuff over. But then in the 80s and 90s, more trendy sort of international varieties began to be planted, as everyone was doing around the world. It's got to be Cabernet or Chardonnay, otherwise you were no one. But what's happening now is much more interesting. Is that producers are really focusing on what makes them unique. How to make wines with a sense of place that are different.
Yeah, and we tasted one of these, didn't we, from a grape that was new to me called Obeidi.
Yeah, we did. Yes, and we're going to come on to that in a bit, aren't we?
Yeah.
I tasted quite a bit of stuff like this when I was there. So. Reviving indigenous or local grape varieties is one key dynamic there. Not just Obeidi, but Miroir, Meksesi, Aswad Garesh. We're going to be talking about this in a bit. But that's part of, I think, a bigger trend to just create a sense of real identity for Lebanese wines. And that's what's really exciting.
Yeah, it really is an exciting place, isn't it? And not just in terms of wine, as you've said, but generally it's exciting.
It just is. I hope I'm communicating that, because I think that's what it was. That was what this trip was for me. It was just tremendously exciting. I was lucky enough to have great guides. I had Michael Karam, the Lebanese wine expert.
I think who made the driving exciting as well.
He made the driving very exciting too. That's another podcast. Maybe we could do a live one from Michael's car. But no, he just a font of knowledge. Just the most amazing man about Lebanon. And he was obviously on our podcast before. Also, Barbara Massad, a food writer and brilliant communicator. And Barbara, she talked to me very movingly about how difficult life in Lebanon is. Barbara's based there at the moment. Her children have all emigrated, for example. But she says, she'd lived in America when she was young, and she found life there to be, and apologies to our lovely American listeners, but for Barbara, she found life in America quite dull, because it was just sort of, she found it very repetitive and sanitized, having come from Lebanon.
Well, so that's fair enough,
she's
isn't
gone
it?
back
Yes,
there.
yeah.
And she described it as, life in Lebanon was hard, but it was living.
And would you say that was what you experienced there? Because it sounds like it was.
No, it really was.
Yeah.
It really was. I was supping, stand-up paddleboarding in the Mediterranean with a glass of rosé in my hand one moment.
A different meaning for supping, really. Supping and supping.
I was double supping.
You were double supping?
That was not very
You're
well,
multitasking.
actually. I was
Oh my
actually
goodness.
falling into the ocean and splashing rosé all over my face more than I was doing anything else. But anyway, you have to wait for the film to see that gem. Then I was being plunged into power cut darkness. The next, you go into a hotel and they'd say, "Welcome, Mr. Richards," and then all the lights would go off. You'd be plunged into darkness, and there'd be a pause, and they'd say, "Welcome to Lebanon." But I ate some of the best goat's cheese ever in my life, and I'm not a massive goat's cheese fan. That was maybe after picking up the goats made that quite magical. But visiting Chateau Mouzar's 1 million bottle plus cellar, experiencing the genuine horrors of Lebanese haggis. Let's not go there.
I think there are more bigger horrors in Lebanon than haggis.
There are. Well, there are. Of course, this was just a particular horror for me.
Focusing on food here.
I just sort of met some Syrian refugees. We did some secret filming. Terrifying car journeys you've touched on, but also the best falafel ever.
Well, we look forward to seeing the results. So when's the Wild Side of Wine coming out?
Yeah, thank you for the setup, for the plug. We filmed in Georgia and Lebanon. Now we're going to film in South Africa and Chile, and then we'll have the first series done, which will then look to sell to the streamers and national broadcasters. The highest bidders coming with pots of gold.
But there are sneak previews available at the moment, aren't there?
So you can get a cheeky preview of the show on winemasters.tv, which is the production company behind it. They've got the Georgia trailer and programmes out there now. Some of it's behind a paywall, but there are bits that are free to view. I can't remember quite what at the moment. But if you want to get a taste of it, do head over there. And Lebanon will be coming soon. So
we'll put a link in the show notes. And we're going to taste a wine you brought back from your trip in due course too, aren't we? Yeah. But first, we're talking about and to Aghi Ourad, who set up the Other Grape.
Yeah, so Aghi actually works in solar energy, but he's a Brit of Algerian descent. He was born in Algeria, but grew up in what he describes as sunny Birmingham. Now, Aghi felt that his homeland and, other countries like it, for example, in southern and eastern Mediterranean, talk about the North Mediterranean a lot, but not the South and East, they were being sort of unfairly forgotten or underappreciated, simply because they were majority Muslim countries. So, he saw a gap in the market, given people are interested, and I think this is true, in things that are new and authentic and intriguing. And so he launched this wine subscription club and magazine to get the wines, the history, the people better known.
And there's quite a personal side to this story as well, isn't there?
Yeah, so Aghi writes quite movingly on his website about how, as someone of vaguely Muslim appearance, in his words, coming of age in the era of the war on terror, he, suffered public humiliation at the hands of the authorities. He describes developing imposter syndrome within European society, which is his own society. At the same time, he was rediscovering his country of birth, Algeria, and what he calls its sort of schizophrenic attitude towards alcohol. It's a historic product in the country, and many sort of people there do drink, but it's often brushed under the carpet because it's considered improper or un-Islamic.
So, interesting though, going back to what you say about his experiences in Europe and the UK, I was just reading for this podcast a summary of a new poll about Islamophobia in Britain. It was by hyphen Savanta Comres, excuse me, and it found that 69% of UK Muslims have experienced some form of Islamophobia in the workplace, and just having a Muslim name makes it less likely to get a job or find a flat or get insurance. And this Islamophobia is apparently widespread in schools, in politics and the media. And yet, the same survey also revealed more positive aspect to this scenario.
That's really interesting. So how the figures are really interesting, but how so in terms of positivity?
Positive. So, well, on the positive side, 53% of British Muslims said there was an improved acceptance of Muslims in the UK now. 93% of Muslims felt they belonged to Britain. There was optimism. 57% thought young Muslims would be more successful than their parents. There are some great Muslim role models, obviously, in public life. So the picture is nuanced, it's fair to say. And there are challenges, but there's also hope. And all of this is really interesting context when we're talking about Aghi's business.
Absolutely, because that's also about sort of hope and challenges too, isn't it? Aghi says it's a way of empowering Algeria. He says its wine industry is kind of a shadow of its former self, in danger almost of disappearing. But there is quality there, and it would be a crying shame to lose it. Plus it can give a lot of people work and income.
Yeah. So you mentioned some stats before about the surprising size of Algerian wine a century or so ago.
Yeah.
And just to back that up, Algeria has grown vines historically. The Phoenicians may well have been responsible for those.
Yeah.
Then it became a French colony from 1830 to 1962. And this was the big push. Its wine industry grew from 17,000 hectares of vineyard in the 1870s to 110,000 hectares in 1890, which is similar to the size of Bordeaux's vineyard area today.
Yeah. So that's a sort of almost tenfold growth.
Yeah. And the catalyst was the phylloxera pest that decimated French vineyards. So they turned to Algeria to bolster their supply.
Yeah, okay. We are going to come on to this in my discussion with Aghi too.
Yeah, because by 1938, the Algerian vineyard was over 400,000 hectares. I mean, that's the size of the entire US wine vineyard today.
So it went from what? Was it 17,000?
So 17,000 in the 1870s.
To 400,000.
Then we went to 110, and by 1938 we're at 400,000 hectares, which is quite a jump, and quite a thought. And so in the mid 1950s, winemaking was the leading sector of the colonial economy in Algeria. It was half of Algeria's exports by value, and a lot of that went to France to be blended into their wines. So your Burgundy or Bordeaux from back in the day may have had a distinctly Algerian accent.
Love that.
Which is just a thought, isn't it?
It is fascinating. It's fascinating.
I mean, it's something we kind of know of in the wine world, but this puts it properly into a bit more.
It's interesting, isn't it? You could dig out
context.
A venerable sort of Bordeaux Burgundy from back in the day, and actually it would have had a lot of Algerian wine.
Nice, deeply coloured.
Not saying all of it would have.
No,
but
it's
still an interesting thought, isn't it?
Possible, isn't it?
Anyway, okay, so I think that way in which Algerian and French wine intersect, and how all this is tied up in the genesis of Appellation Contrôlée is something that I discussed with Aghi. So this is a good point to bring Aghi in. And I started by asking him about his business, The Other Grape, and how he's managing or aiming to make a virtue of lots of challenges, like Algeria's complicated relationship with wine or Britain's complicated relationship with immigration and racism.
So it's definitely an adventure. But I think the way we try and do it is to really bring the human stories to the fore. So wine production in this region, in these countries, does not follow the same storyline, if you want, as wine production in Bordeaux or even in like southern Italy, like Puglia, which or Sicily, which resemble in many ways the same sort of terroir, the same kind of heat as well, and kind of pastoral nature of many of the countries on the southern and eastern shores of the Mediterranean. The societal human stories are very different. We have in Lebanon, we have a lot of like economic and political crises that mean that winemakers have to jump through hoops to bring just to be able to produce their wine every year. In Algeria, you have seasonal workers who have pressure put on them by imams, who are the equivalent of priests, to not work. Picking grapes, it's haram, it's illegal in the eyes of God, and so you shouldn't be doing this. But then many of these seasonal workers are students who need the money for school and school supplies, and so you have these kind of dichotomies, right, that raise a lot of questions that wouldn't be asked in Europe, if you want. So this is one of the ways we're trying to really show that there's no contradiction between the two, and we have a long way to go.
I'm really interested in this, and it's an area I don't know very much about, but the issue of Islam and wine or alcohol, I understand it's quite, there has been historically a lot of discussion about this. What's your take? Can you be, if I'm being very simplistic, can you be a good Muslim and drink wine or not? And what about the secular nature of it, as well as the economic sort of issues? Can you just dive into that a little bit for us?
Sure. So the Quran makes a distinction between two different types of alcohol, nabid and khamar, and so the nabid being maybe the lighter one, and khamar the stronger one. And there were different schools of thought in Islam that state that one is acceptable to drink, the other isn't. Of course, today there isn't really the same distinction between the two, but ultimately, I mean, it's more than, it's a topic that I think deserves a lot more time if you want to discuss, and there's a lot of space for academic study into this as well. But ultimately, we see the relationship between God and the person is one that's vertical. So it really is up to the person whether they want to drink or not. And ultimately, the idea behind not drinking alcohol is because even the Prophet Muhammad's companions went to pray next to him after having drunk alcohol, and so they weren't in the right state of mind to really connect with God. And so this is why you shouldn't be drinking, because it clouds your judgment. Of course, throughout history, throughout time, different caliphates, different forms of Islamic government have been more and less tolerant to alcohol. It's also been a good way of collecting taxes as well, because these regions, like I said, produce a lot of alcohol, a lot of wine, even of course distilled spirits. Alcohol is an Arabic word as well, alcohol. So it's one that for the past, now what's it, 1500 years, has still, it's a question that still divides, right? And even today within different countries, Muslim majority countries, you see different attitudes towards alcohol. So there is no right or wrong answer. It's just, it depends on the political system at the time.
And you also touch on the economics of it there. Algeria, there was obviously French rule, as there was in Lebanon, both countries you started out with on this project. What's obviously wine growing means labor, it means economic activity, it means taxation, as you say. What's that aspect to it? Are we going to see a potential revival in wine in these countries, a sort of muddling along approach to Muslim majority rule and alcohol or wine as an important economic product and also export? Is that something that's going to, do you think, grow in the future?
So this question very much depends on where you are. Just to quickly, if you want, to connect the two, Algeria and Lebanon, because these are the two countries that we started off with. The Other Grape is for now just a pilot, but we are looking to expand to other countries. and within the same countries as well. But the wine trade in Algeria and Lebanon, they follow the same trajectory. In fact, they were started by the international, if you want, varieties that we now know of, such as Grenache, Cinsault, Carignan. So these grape varieties that came from the Rhone and Southern Europe were actually planted in Algeria and Lebanon by I think they were Jesuit priests. So the industries that exist today actually originate from these moments, and then of course it was the kind of the French in both Algeria and Lebanon that pushed these industries, and they provided for the most part the demand for wine in both Algeria and Lebanon. Algeria especially because it was a huge French colony, and Lebanon was more protectorate, but still French servicemen and women, were there providing the bulk of the demand for the wine. Following the departure of the French, the Lebanese, because they have a strong Christian, community, as well as Armenian, as you mentioned in your previous podcast, but also, quite a cosmopolitan outlook in Beirut. The Beiruti crowd, is one that loves to party and just enjoy a good time. I think they're very French in that aspect. So Lebanon and Algeria followed different trajectories following the departure of the French. So whereas in Lebanon the industry had existed, wine, there had been a strong local wine industry making vin doux, sweet wine. Up until then, the industry was happily carried on by Lebanese people like Serge Auchard and stuff. So these were people that started wineries and when the French were there, and so carried on afterwards. With the Algerians, it was a different matter. It was more political, and in 1971, the president of Algeria actually uprooted most of the vines at the time, just to spite the French. They had a political spat. And Algeria was still the fourth biggest producer of wine at the time. So that's the equivalent of Joe Biden taking, basically a unilateral decision to uproot, over half of America's vines, because America is currently the fourth biggest producer of wine in the world. So you see drastically different trajectories, and that plays out into today's, if you want, outlook. Lebanon has a vibrant, really quite dynamic wine industry that's really promoting now indigenous grapes. They really see the importance of it to its economy, whereas Algeria has been stuck in a oil and gas rut, classic hydrocarbons resource curse. And now we have a few people such as myself who are really looking to diversify the economy. It's really important for the survival of not only Algeria, but the same can be said of Tunisia and other countries as well, where economically you need to be pushing your own production.
I'm interested in what you said there about Algeria's history. I want you to talk a bit more about that, because Lebanon, we sort of know, the Phoenicians back in the day were the original wine merchants, taking the vine all around the Mediterranean, sort of giving the gift of wine, if you like, to the world. But Algeria is not somewhere we talk about very much in terms of wine history. But at one point, it was one of the world's biggest wine producers.
Absolutely. And this is so... Algeria is a fascinating place, a place very hard to get to, but once you're there, you see it. All these like structures, all these this architecture from political entities of the past just really like show themselves to you. And part of this experience, especially if you go to the West, but everywhere, honestly, everywhere in northern Algeria, but the West is wine country in inverted commas. You see old wineries, old colonial wineries, both abandoned and rehabilitated, right? So that are still in use today. You see old wineries, you see towns that were built around all these wineries. So, in Algeria, the French made essentially the economy go round on wine. So it wasn't their intention. They didn't want anything to, they didn't want their colonies to compete against the mainland economy. And of course, we know the French were making a lot of wine. And so they had actually tried to plant cotton and tobacco and all these kind of colonial crops to complement the economy. But in fact, they found that the vine worked the best. And so before Algeria became French, or the French entered in 1830, but it was very experimental the first few decades. Vines had started to be planted, but then it was in 1879 when there was the phylloxera pest. I'm sure your listeners probably know a thing or two about the phylloxera pest. Usually I have to explain it, but it decimated French vineyards. And the one fact that came out of that shows the extent to which it was devastating for the French was that they were no longer self-sufficient in wine. So they could no longer supply their own demand. And so this is what really gave a boost to viticulture in Algeria. And so here you see, between 1880 and 1900, production go from 100 million liters to 500 million liters. And yeah, so what we see is that Algeria become the fourth biggest producer of wine in the world. Right? They were at its zenith. Algeria was producing over 2 billion liters of wine a year. On average, it was just over 1 billion, but it reached the point where they were producing 2 billion. And they were comfortably the biggest exporter because most of it was exported in inverted commas to France as well.
So what was all this wine doing? Because, you don't sort of, I wasn't around back then, but you don't sort of remember many famous sort of Algerian crew. Was a lot of this being blended into French wine?
Absolutely. So, it was mostly, so Algeria, was 85% Muslim, but it was the fourth biggest producer of wine in the world, right? So most of it did go to France, and it was known as vin de coupage. And it was blended with French wine just to add to its kind of, add to the alcohol content, add to the color, make it a bit stronger because, of course, as you know, wine grapes that grow in hotter climates have more sugar, which turn into more alcohol upon fermentation. And so this was really the primary use of Algerian wine, if you want. And fantastic side note as well is that this was one of the, if you want, the triggers that led to the appellations as we know of them today.
So what happened was in the late 19th century, when France was ravaged by phylloxera, Algeria stepped into the breach to supply them with the wine they needed. But then fast forward to the 1930s, the French said, well, thank you very much. We've had that. We've kind of worked out a way to get over phylloxera. Now we're going to create these laws which protect our wine and mean, you're not welcome anymore. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So what's funny is that in Algeria, they were one of the first to, if you want, implement a US rootstock, just rather than like chemical treatments. And there was a lot of fighting between that. But this meant that they were able to produce a lot of the wine. And so they were able to then export it. And this led to a bit of a diplomatic spat between a UK importer called Robert Leakey, and this was the Robert Leakey affair, who claimed that Algerian wine, because it was used in vin de coupage in Bordeaux with Bordeaux wines, was as good as Bordeaux. And so you can imagine the French wine producers being as restive and protective as they are, really hated this. And so they fought to protect the identity of their wine from imitators, which culminated into the appellations in the 1930s as we know today. So it really was the impetus really came from Algerian wine because there was so much of it, and it was mixed with Bordelais wine.
How fascinating! How fascinating! But now you're trying to sort of revive this proud wine making legacy of these countries, which is, in some cases slightly fallen into sad sort of not being very well known. But with the Other Grape, this new business, you call it a concept at the moment, and you're hoping to roll out. If you were going to choose one wine which you sort of selected initially to epitomize what you're trying to do, what would it be and why?
So I'd like to go for an Algerian, just out of personal maybe preference, but I think I'll go with the Lebanese, because I think it really epitomizes the search for identity. And so this is for me the Obeidi grape, and this is a grape that is used, that's been used for centuries to make sweet wine, vin doux, in kind of religious settings, churches, stuff like this. So it was also a grape that was kind of uprooted by the French when they first came, because they felt it was harsh to work with. But now we see a renaissance of like these Lebanese indigenous grapes, because they're being turned into dry wine, and they add this totally different flavor to this like flavor profile to what you're used to. So this Obeidi grape, when it's turned into dry style wine, it retains that kind of almost sweetness, creaminess character to it. You have like hints of honeydew with underlying creaminess, and I think it's perfect for people who prefer a kind of not sweet but almost fuller bodied kind of style white wine, the kind of like sweeter Riesling compared to a drier style white. And it's not just the Obeidi, there's the Merwa as well. There are other indigenous grapes that the Lebanese are creating, and so are turning into dry style wines. And these things take a long time. You can't just plant one year and then it grows, and then you're like, oh yeah, I've perfected it. The story of indigenous grapes is really one that plays out over many years.
So you've got this wonderful business. You're doing a magazine with it. Now I've read it, and it's great. But in this magazine, you've published this fantastic poem, and I'd like you, if you can, to very kindly share it with us. Maybe give it a tiny bit of a preface as well.
This comes from a book by Alex Rowell, who is a British journalist, incredible person. And he's written a book called Vintage Humor, the Islamic Wine Poetry of Abu Nuwas. And, we were talking about Islam and wine earlier on. We could do many episodes about that. But essentially, Abu Nuwas lived in the 700s, 800s, and he was half Iraqi, half Iranian today, and he was this quite like incredible character who wrote poetry about debauchery, drinking wine, sleeping with both men and women. And we think about the past, the first Islamic caliphates as maybe being very religious, but in fact they partook in parties and drinking. And Abu Nuwas received state patronage from I think Muhammad al-Amin, who was an Abbasid caliphate. And so he has a huge, if you want, collection of poems called Khamriyat. And it's not just, wine poetry in Arabic is known as Khamriyat. So there's even a name, it goes to show how much wine was pervasive in this time. And he's not the only one. There are many. Omar Khayyam is another well-known wine poet. But so yeah, I have this book, and for the magazine we wanted to choose one of the poems that we liked and put it in there, and Alex graciously accepted. So I can go ahead and read one for you. I think it's my favorite. Someone came to reproach me with an innovation. a plan of which I can bear zero toleration, urging me off wine because the fate of he who tastes its eternal damnation. These rebukers bring me nothing but resolve to grant wine my lifelong dedication. Shall I spurn it when God himself hasn't, and our own caliph shows its veneration? Superlative wine, radiant and bright, rivaling the very sun's scintillation. While we may not know heaven in this life, still we have paradise's libation. So critic, pour me one and sing for me, for wine and I are siblings till my expiration. Should I die, bury me next to a vineyard, his roots supply my bones, irrigation.
I'm not sure there's much that can be added to that. Aghi, thank you very much indeed.
No worries. I want to say that is a translation by Alex Rowell. So again, thanks to him for that.
Thank you.
I love that wine poetry is a thing in Arab culture. And also interesting what he says about a vertical relationship between God and the person. So decisions about alcohol being personal.
Yeah, I'm sure there probably would be people who disagree with that, but it was really interesting to hear that from him. You know, I think there are probably entire books and podcasts that could explore these issues, which we probably know very little about. But it's just really interesting to get a general perspective on it, isn't it, from Aghi? So he also, just to say this, by the way, he wants to expand to include wines from places like Palestine, Tunisia, Albania. That's on his radar, you know, and sort of grow the focus on indigenous grapes and sort of unique wines. That's where he's thinking.
And just to pick up on something we mentioned before the interview when we heard more from Aghi, I do think it's fascinating how Algerian wine may have been one of the prime drivers behind the initial development of the Appellation Contrôlée system.
Yeah.
Did you know that? I mean, I did not know that.
I guess so, because so much of it was being blended into French wine. You know, maybe they were worried it was going to start to rival their classics.
You know. So your fine Burgundy or Bordeaux may have been happily beefed up with some sturdy Algerian vino for quite a while in the early 20th century. But then there came a time when the French started to worry about the consequences and became more protectionist. Yeah,
because
understandably,
the appellation system is inherently protectionist, isn't it? So that's what became the AOC system. Now the AOP, I think, is that right? Goodness. Anyway, you know, that then ultimately led to the rug being pulled from under the Algerian wine industry's feet, didn't it? You know, their markets collapsed, and I guess instead of carrying on like Lebanon, you know, it's sadly sort of fallen into slight disrepair.
Now, Aghi also mentioned indigenous grapes and interesting wines, and we have a couple of bottles here, don't we?
We've got bottles, people.
We've got bottles always.
We're packing bottles. So, yeah, Aghi very kindly sent us through a few of the wines he's currently offering through the Other Grape. The first one we've already mentioned, haven't we? It's the Abadi grape, made by Chateau Umsiat. It's 2018, 12.5%. Isn't it? You've got it there.
So I have got it here. So this has bags of character. It's succulent but easy drinking. You've got aromas of orange blossom, baked apricot. There's a sort of a richness to the texture. It's quite a sunny wine and then just that gentle bitter twist on the finish. You know, I think it'd be great with meze. And actually, in Aghi's magazine, there's a recipe for a sort of a baked cauliflower with tahini and pomegranate and coriander that's described as a meze dish. And you think, wow, that would be really nice with this wine.
Yeah. And it's really nice to see these indigenous varieties coming through now. You know, and we'll be seeing more of them, I think, in the future. And I think in this wine, you do get that sense of Lebanese wines having real character, what I commented on earlier, don't you? They're not boring. This is not a boring wine.
No.
You get that sunny, sort of sun-ripened flavours, but you also get the balance. It's not a high-acid wine, is it? But
no,
succulent,
but you wouldn't expect that necessarily.
But it's very balanced. You know, and if you remember, we talked about Michael Karam earlier, but he was saying on the previous episode on Lebanon, which he featured him.
In season 1, wasn't it?
That's right, yes. He was saying how Lebanese whites are, in his view, almost more exciting than the reds at the moment, and well worth trying for that reason. And a couple of other winemakers backed him up on that, which is really interesting. If we think of Lebanon as reds, actually the whites are really exciting right now.
Yeah, that's it. It's surprising, isn't it? But we have got a red, but it's an Algerian red, actually.
We do.
The Saint Augustin Mont du Tesla AOG 2017. So I really like this. It's a bit rustic, leathery, sort of gamey, earthy. It's got a bit of raisined fruit in a good way, but you've also got some nice chalky tannin and that sort of cutting through and then balanced alcohol, 13%.
Yes,
which makes it so perfect. And, I would say ideal, this one, with a lovely slow-cooked meat casserole.
Yeah, you've got a helpful little map on the back as well, actually, funny enough, which puts it in context of where everything is.
Where it actually is.
But no,
you love your maps, don't you, love?
The food you mentioned as well in the magazine. I think you mentioned the magazine. They've got a great recipe from Algeria which you could put with this. I think it's called esquef.
Esquef.
I don't know if that's the right pronunciation, but it's basically beans, veg, tomatoes, pasta, and lamb merguez sausage.
Oh, that does sound. And it just fabulous,
you mentioned the casserole.
It?
The meat. This would pair really well with this kind of thing.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I just like the fact that this wine, again, it wasn't just rich fruit. There was culture.
There was
and
other stuff there,
balance. It was herbs and smoke and roasted pepper. It wasn't too big a style, wasn't it? It's fundamentally medium-bodied and really elegant and food-friendly. Just quite cultured, despite the rustic edges that you mentioned, which I think we found quite intriguing.
They add to it.
So I think it's an intriguing style. And, if there's one thing to say about this wine, it's I would like to try more of where this came from. Yeah.
So just to give you an idea of pricing, you can buy a duo set from the Other Grape for £29, or if you want the magazine as well, that's £39. So that particular pair includes a different Algerian red. It's the Koutoubia, but you sort of get the idea. And they're all well worth trying. And the magazine is great. It's got some great photos, brilliant articles, and poetry.
Great poetry. We've got one final bottle here, haven't we?
We have.
Which I brought all
the
way
back. Quite a journey.
From Lebanon for you to try, as we mentioned.
In your suitcase. It was brave, I have to say, because if that had smashed, you'd have had some very colourful shirts.
It's very inky style, isn't it?
It is.
So this is the Sept Syrah 2019 from the Batroun Hills. So this is a newer area. The Bekaa grows the vast majority of Lebanese wine. This area of Batroun is nearer the coast, but there's some really exciting producers there, including this guy, Maher Harb. It's biodynamic. He started this project as a tribute to his father, who died during the Civil War. The Syrah was the first wine he ever made from his own vineyard. So it's a very emotional wine for him. And I remember tasting it with him there when we filmed, and he was getting very emotional. It was a really special moment. And that was the 2016 Syrah. And this one is 2019. I think it's amazing. What do you think?
It's intense. It's really intense. My goodness, there's so much pure dark fruit, but also spice. It's really full on, isn't it?
I just find it a really intriguing expression of Syrah. If you like Syrah, you've got to try this one, because you've got Rhone, you've got Australian Shiraz, you've got Chilean Syrah. This is, I think, for me, unique. It's quite rare to find a Syrah expression of this style, but it's still very Syrah. It's inky, it's wild. You've got violets and black pepper and sausage. You've got what I noticed most about this wine is grown at altitude. I think it says 950 meters in Nehla on the neck label. You get tense acidity and a really fine, sort of abundant tannin. It's just very sort of brooding and savoury style, and very, very complex. And I get the sense it will age really, really well and develop. It's sort of seamless. It's just so much sort of complexity. Almost, now I'm sort of tasting it thinking, almost a slightly angry wine. Do you agree with that? Is that taking it? But there's a kind of sense of grr here, which I love. Not everyone might love, because it's a bit big in that sense. It's kind of quite full throttle.
I've never thought of a wine as angry before, but
no, in a good way.
In a good way.
People can
full
be good
of
when they're angry too.
Positive anger.
Yes, just intensity. Anyway, the Sept. We'll put a photo of the bottle.
Yeah, it's a very cool bottle.
We will be seeing
really
more
cool
of Sept in the future.
Yeah. So there we are, a brief snapshot of these wines and the wine scene. But I think it's enough to say these wines, these regions and countries, they are well worth checking out. There's real history here, great stories, people, producers, and it can all make for quite a wine adventure.
An adventure is exactly the word. We all want a wine adventure, don't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there we are. Here's one ready made for you. You can never really make predictions about these things, but you think there is definitely potential for a revival of wine around the southern and eastern Mediterranean. It would be lovely to see. Especially maybe in these higher altitude locations, we get these balanced wines.
Cooler
the quality's
locations.
there, the history is there, the stories are there. To be fair, much will depend on the politics and the religion and the social pressures, but the wine potential is there.
I suppose it also depends on the interest from us as wine lovers. But we'd certainly, wouldn't we, recommend trying wines from these places? And you can start by checking out The Other Grape.
Yeah, we're definitely up for it, as we Always are. Anyway, thank you very much to Aghi. Thanks to the winemakers of Lebanon and Algeria. And thanks to you for listening. Until next time, cheers.